Which states have shifted the most in the U.S. House between 2020 and 2022? Today on Political Access, we'll go through each state and find out where the biggest changes are. So I've got a spreadsheet open here. I made this all myself. I've already done some other political shift videos, so be sure to take a look at those if you'd like. So what we've got here is the Democratic vote for the U.S. House in each state for 2020. In the next column, it's the same for the Republicans. In the next column, it's the 2022 Democratic statewide popular vote for the House. And the next column is the same for the Republicans. Then we've got the shifts for each party. And finally, all the way on the right, that's the net change. And we've got the shading here. The darkest colors are going to be 10 or more points. The solid colors, 5 to 9.9. And the lighter colors, those are going to be under a 5-point shift. Now, to make this easy on myself, I took the data from Wikipedia. It does generally seem to be accurate, but there were a couple of moments where there was some discrepancies. Not much, but just a little bit, a fraction of a point usually. And if you watched my previous video on the most biased U.S. redistricting map, there was one mistake in Iowa. The Republican vote there in 2022 should have been a few points higher. So in the end, that did make that map a little less favorable for the Republicans. Still had a bias for them, but just not as much. Now, one last thing to mention. Some states did have uncontested races where there was no major party opposition, so that will skew the statewide popular vote. There's no real good way to compensate for that. I just took the data that I had. Other states like Louisiana and California, their election systems might also leave out one of the other parties in the general election. That could skew things a little bit as well. But even having said all that, let's get started in Alabama. Let's go through this quickly. In 2020, Democrats got 29.7% of the vote, and Republicans got 69. 2022, Democratic vote dropped off to 23.7, Republican vote increased to 70.1. That's -6 for the Democrats, plus 1.1 for the Republicans. It's a net change of 7.1 in favor of the Republicans. In Alaska, back in 2020, there actually was not a Democratic opponent. That was an independent. There's a few of those races on here. They're all in states with one congressional district. So the number is underlined to indicate that 45.3 is not representative of the Democratic Party. But I put it in here anyway as that was the major opponent for the Republicans in this race. So that translated into a 19.1% gain for the Democrats. That's a major shift. And of course, they even flipped that seat there in Alaska. They do have a new voting system there. That was probably a factor. Prior to the final round, Republicans did have more of that vote. So keep that in mind in a state like Alaska. Next, in Arizona, that had a big shift toward the Republicans, 12.8%. Arkansas had a little bit of a shift toward the Democrats, 3.4%. California had a medium shift toward the Republicans, 5.5%. Colorado went a little bit toward the Democrats by 3.2%. Connecticut had a decent shift toward the Republicans, 5.8%. Delaware also went toward the Republicans by 4.9%. Florida, that had a heavy lurch to the right, 13.6%. Georgia went a little bit toward the Republicans by 2.6%. Hawaii also went a little bit toward the GOP by 2.7%. Idaho, slight shift toward the right by 0.7%. Illinois went toward the Republicans by 3.6%. Indiana went toward the Republicans as well by 3%. Iowa had a decent shift toward the Republicans by 6.7%. Kansas went the other way toward the Democrats by 1.7%. Kentucky went a bit toward the right by 1.9%. Louisiana, they had a major shift toward the Republicans by 14.5 points. Maine was almost exactly the same, 0.1% toward the Democrats. Same with Maryland. They also went only 0.1% toward the left. Massachusetts, however, that's a blue state, but that went hard toward the Republicans by 13.5%. Still, Republicans did not really get close to winning any of those races. Michigan, slight shift toward the Democrats by 0.9%. Minnesota, mild shift toward the Republicans by 0.5 point. Mississippi, 2.5 points toward the Democrats. Missouri, 2.2 toward the Republicans. Montana ended up having a nice shift toward the Republicans by 5.9%. A lot of that is because in the 2nd congressional district there, the independent candidate got more vote than the Democratic candidate. Nebraska was almost the same, 0.2% toward the Democrats. Nevada had a healthy 5.8% shift toward the Republicans. New Hampshire went a little bit toward the Democrats by 2.3%. New Jersey, that had a decent shift toward the Republicans by 6.1%. New Mexico was very similar, 0.4% shift toward the Democrats. New York, we know Republicans had success there, and that went hard toward the right by 14.8%. North Carolina, that also went toward the right by 4.9%. In North Dakota, that went hard toward the Democrats by 16.8%. And that race this year was a Republican up against an independent candidate, so that does need to be considered. Next in Ohio, that went a little bit toward the Democrats by 1.1%. Oklahoma had a similar shift toward the Democrats by 1.3%. Oregon, that went the other way toward the Republicans by 5.4%. Pennsylvania also had a shift toward the right by 4.2%. Next state is Rhode Island. That went very hard toward the Republicans by 27.2%. Part of the reason there is in 2020, one of the districts there was a Democrat going up against two independent candidates. So that will skew the numbers and might make it look like the Republicans made up more than it seems this year when comparing it to 2 years ago. Moving on to South Carolina, that also went very hard toward the Republicans by 20.8%. South Dakota had independent candidates instead of Democrats both in 2020 and 2022, but it still shifted 7.2% toward the Democrats. Tennessee went 9.9% toward the Republicans. Next state is Texas, and that went hard back toward the Republicans by 10.8%. Utah also went toward the Republicans by 6.1%. Vermont did as well by 6.7%. Virginia had a mild shift toward the right by 1.4%. Washington went also toward the Republicans by 4.1%. West Virginia had a little bit of a tilt back toward the Democrats by 0.8%. Wisconsin, that went very hard toward the right by 12.5%. And finally, Wyoming, almost no change, 0.2% toward the Democrats. So that's all the data I have. I tried to double check everything to make sure there were no mistakes, but you never know. But I think this is pretty much it. This shows you where the changes are. This was not an overwhelmingly red year. Certainly in some places it was more than others. 2020 was a fairly even year in the House. I think these are two relatively good years to compare the data to. Obviously one is a presidential year, one is a midterm, and also redistricting took place since 2 years ago. But let's take all of this data and help visualize it by applying it to a map. And here it is. This shows you the margins. 10 points or more are the dark colors. Solid colors are 5 to 9.9. The light colors are 1 to 4.9% shifts. And the tilt margins, those are the very light colors under a 1% shift. So what are the takeaways? Well, a lot of the states did go back toward the Republicans. Of course, they did win the popular vote in the House, so that's going to explain some of it. But a big state like Texas, and to a lesser extent Arizona, those had large shifts toward the Republicans. And we know Republicans had a ton of success in Florida. They also did very well in a state like New York. Wisconsin, they clearly did very well in. That is the dark red color. Democrats had very minimal gains at a couple of places, but it was key for them to do so in Ohio and Michigan. And in some other states like Washington, even though the vote did shift toward the Republicans there, Democrats gained a seat there. And of course, as I previously mentioned, they also flipped Alaska. And there are some surprises, mostly in the Northeast. A lot of those are pretty dark red shifts. And even California, that shifted toward the Republicans as well. A lot of the shifts are going to be still meaningless. It could translate into an extra seat or two depending on the state. So there's a lot of data here. You can draw several different conclusions, but this does show you where the shifts are in the House in each state. So we'll see where it leads. But I hope you enjoyed this kind of data. Let me know in the comments, which states are you most surprised by and which are you least surprised by? Let me know down below. And on your way out, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next video.